Jimmy Kimmel thought his late-night throne was completely untouchable, right up until Melania Trump hijacked the microphone and turned his glitzy Hollywood roast into an absolute graveyard for the liberal elite. Jimmy, do you still recall the flavor of those tiny shrimp they served over at Jeffrey Epstein's mansion back in 2010? Or were you entirely too distracted, debating how many procedures Chelsea Handler needed just to stay thin enough for her late-night monologues? The atmosphere inside the Netflix auditorium didn't merely get cold. The oxygen practically evaporated. 3,000 Hollywood elites, draped in designer fabrics that cost more than an average Midwesterner's entire mortgage, sat totally paralyzed in their plush velvet chairs. The so-called truth roast was meant to be the evening the establishment finally put the Ice Queen in her place. Jimmy Kimmel, the designated court jester for the deep state, had spent weeks practicing his smug punchlines. He stood center stage, washed in the fake glare of a spotlight that had spent decades covering up the ugly wrinkles of a rotting entertainment industry. His industrial-strength smile, normally as permanent as a fresh Botox injection, started to curdle at the corners. Melania Trump didn't wait for his signal. She refused to wait for the teleprompter to give her permission to breathe. She stood right at the microphone, looking like a solid pillar of marble inside a room packed with melting wax figures. "Come on, Trump, please. This is a comedy show, not a military tribunal," Kimmel stammered, his vocal cords snapping like a dry twig. "You appear to be mixing up a harmless joke with a federal indictment." He desperately tried to look out at the audience, searching for that comforting, sycophantic laughter that usually softened his every mistake. But the laughs were totally dead. The fake, canned applause had been completely choked out by the heavy, unfiltered reality of a question nobody was ever allowed to ask in this specific zip code. The only confusion here, Jimmy, is your assumption that the dark shadows of 2010 can be covered up by the bright stage lights of 2026. She fired back, her tone hitting like a calm, lethal blade. "You talk about rescuing comedy while basically hosting a funeral for the truth." Melania's eyes, sharper than any camera lens in the entire building, never drifted from his face. She watched the sweat start to push through the thick layer of heavy TV foundation on Kimmel's forehead. She noticed how his fingers clamped around the microphone stand, his knuckles turning a ghostly shade of white. This was the guy who built a massive career out of making fun of the American working class. Yet here he stood, physically shivering under the stare of a woman who actually cherished the country he looked down upon. "We make fun of everybody here, Melania. It's just what we do. We even roasted Tom Brady," Kimmel squeaked, his panic now totally obvious. "Chelsea is an absolute legend. She is the voice of modern women." Melania didn't even flinch. "The voice of modern women," she repeated, her voice dripping with a quiet, classy disgust. "Are you talking about the woman who tells our young daughters that it's completely amazing to be childless and smoke special substances while skiing without clothes down a snowy mountain? The woman who pumps out videos showing that waking up at noon and popping an edible is the absolute peak of a life well lived?" A quiet whisper cascaded through the back rows where the technical crew and junior staff were sitting. They weren't the folks vacationing out in the Hamptons. They were the ones who actually remembered what it meant to raise a family. "It is about choice. It is about freedom," Kimmel yelled back, finally grabbing onto a shred of his pre-written script. "Chelsea has the guts to say what everyone else is secretly thinking. Chelsea has the guts to promise to leave America on 2 different occasions. And yet, she never musters up the actual courage to pack up and go." Melania fired right back, her rhythm never slowing down for a second. "She stays right here, feeding off the exact same system she pretends to hate. A whole lot like you, Jimmy. You went after Dave Chappelle relentlessly until Netflix informed you he brought in way too much money to get canceled. And suddenly, you discovered this weird, newfound respect for him. Jimmy tilted his head back, desperately trying to force a laugh that just refused to surface. His brain was sprinting backward to the year 2010. He was vividly remembering the guest list. He was recalling the specific names that were supposed to be completely erased from the history books. Disgraced royals, controversial directors, and several others whose identities would instantly end careers if they were ever whispered into a live mic. Melania leaned closer to the podium, her presence magnifying until she seemed to consume the entire auditorium. Is that the real reason you are so furious, Jimmy? Because you are fully aware the elite insider dinner parties are drawing to a close? Because you recognize that no matter how many tasteless jokes or extremist punchlines you stuff into your routines, they are totally incapable of drowning out the sound of reality breaking the illusion? Kimmel looked like a guy who had just witnessed an apparition, or maybe he had caught a glimpse of his own unfiltered reflection for the very first time. The crowd, the ultra-liberals, as some might call them, sat frozen in a state of mutual shock. They were watching their ultimate champion get completely taken apart by a figure they had spent 10 years trying to silence. "This isn't the way this was planned to unfold," Jimmy muttered, speaking more to his own shoes than to his opponent. "The strategy was simple. You were the punchline, and I was the master of the evening. The massive flaw in your strategies, Jimmy, is that you forgot the king has already returned," Melania declared, a faint, knowing smirk finally touching her mouth. She stepped back from the microphone, the sharp click of her heels echoing like a judge's gavel through the bizarrely quiet room. The venue was no longer an arena for amusement. It had morphed into an active crime scene, and the central piece of evidence was the absolute, trembling cowardice of the host standing in the spotlight. This represented phase 1 of the total collapse of Hollywood as they understood it. The political swamp was draining right underneath the glaring lights of its own favorite sandbox, and as Melania walked away, abandoning Kimmel to decay in his own quiet panic, every single individual in that space understood one singular fact. The guest roster from 2010 was merely the opening act. The truth roast had barely even commenced, and Jimmy Kimmel was the guy getting incinerated to ashes. Jimmy Kimmel pulled at his collar, his face turning a blotchy, panicked red under the hot stage lights. He knew the broadcast cameras were still rolling, streaming this massive train wreck to millions of people who were currently watching the king of late night lose his crown in real time. Behind him, the giant digital screen flashed the Truth Roast logo, but the branding just felt like a cruel mockery now. The crowd, a sea of hand-picked progressive activists and Hollywood yes-men, started to shift around uncomfortably, holding their breath like they were paused in time. Kimmel leaned into the mic, trying to bring back that signature smirk, the one he used to talk down to Middle America every night at 1130 p.m. "You know, Melania, it's funny hearing you talk about guest lists and fancy dinners when you've spent the last 10 years locked in a massive mansion at Mar-a-Lago, hiding behind a wall of cold indifference. We're talking about real people here, people who actually have a spine, like Chelsea Handler and Rosie O'Donnell. These women are heroes. They put their money where their mouths were and stood up to the regime your husband built. They were ready to leave the country and go into exile rather than breathe the same air as your supporters." Jimmy waved his hands frantically at the audience, hoping a spark of that usual political fire would wake up the room. They had the guts to say, "I'm out," because their morals were worth more to them than a Hollywood contract. Melania Trump didn't move an inch, her posture so perfect it made Kimmel look like a crumbling statue of salt. She let the silence drag on for just a second too long, forcing the crowd to swallow the sheer desperation of Jimmy's panic. "You call people heroes when they promise to run away, only to stick around and collect a paycheck from the exact same crowd they claim to hate? You call Rosie and Ellen heroes because they backed up their talk with their wallets, even though they never actually packed a single bag? That isn't bravery. Jimmy, that's just a calculated PR stunt pretending to be a moral crusade. It's elite cowardice wrapped in a thin, see-through layer of fake virtue. Kimmel's jaw locked, his eyes darting to the producer in the front row, who was frantically making the wrap-it-up gesture. Hold on. So now Chelsea Handler is a coward? The woman who literally puts her career on the line every day to expose the truth about your husband's deep state fantasies? She promised to leave America both times he won the presidency. Melania, both times she was ready to sacrifice everything for her beliefs. Melania took a slow, purposeful step toward him, her shadow stretching across the stage like a dark, elegant warning. And yet, she's still here. Isn't she? She's still living out in Los Angeles, still waking up at noon to record her day in the life of a child-free woman videos, eating her special gummies, and skiing without clothes down snowy mountains, while the rest of the country struggles to buy groceries. She refused to leave because she loves her Beverly Hills mansion way more than she hates my husband. She stuck around because she knew that outside this American bubble of privilege, her sad content would get the total silence it deserves. You call it a sacrifice, but we both know exactly how the sausage is made in this town, Jimmy. Your writers make up these fake idols, these brave celebrities who threaten to leave because it gets clicks, it builds fake outrage, and most importantly, it generates revenue. It's a script written by people who wouldn't know a real principle if it hit them right in the face at a cocktail party. Jimmy tried to force a laugh, but it came out as a hollow, rattling sound that died before it even reached the second row. Oh, so now we're just manufacturing heroes? Are you trying to convince me that the media's 99.1% success rate is just a coincidence? Are you going to say these women don't really care about the modern female empowerment they preach every single day? Melania's eyes locked onto his with the exact precision of a radar-guided missile. I'm saying they care about the branded version of feminism, not the actual reality of it. They tell women it's fabulous to stay childless, to get dogs instead of having kids, and to act like teenagers forever. But that's not a real life, Jimmy. That's a black hole. They celebrate the fact that nobody will remember them, nobody will truly love them, and they'll never know what it's like to raise a family. And you, acting as their head cheerleader, are just as guilty for pushing this toxic poison onto the American public. Kimmel felt the air in the room getting super thin, his vision blurring slightly as the Ice Queen completely wrecked the foundation of his entire social circle. You're just going after her because she's a successful woman who doesn't fit your old-school mold. She's an activist. She's a comedian. She's a tough survivor. She's been scraped more times than a grill at a Benihana restaurant, and she wears it as a badge of honor. Melania didn't even blink at the gross joke, keeping her vibe of classy, disconnected pity. Going through extreme procedures isn't a badge of honor. Jimmy, no matter how many times your writers try to turn it into a punchline, it's a tragedy that you've turned into a moneymaker, just like you turned that 2010 guest list into a secret that everyone knows but nobody talks about. You mentioned Chelsea was at that disgraced billionaire's house in 2010, along with Prince Andrew and Woody Allen. Was that part of the feminist agenda too? Having dinner with guys who treated women like completely disposable objects? Jimmy's hand started to physically shake now, the mic picking up the loud thumping of his racing heart. That was just one dinner. There were news articles about it. It wasn't some massive party. You're reaching, Melania, you're trying to tie comedy to something dark because you just can't handle the roast. Melania leaned forward, her voice dropping to a quiet whisper that echoed like thunder through the speakers. I'm not the one scrambling for a lifeline, Jimmy. I'm the one standing on the beach watching your boat sink. You talk about real comedy, but the only funny thing in this room is you actually thinking you're still in charge. You only protected Dave Chappelle when it became obvious that canceling him would hurt the wallets of the people paying your salary. You follow the trends while we follow the truth. The elite circle you serve is nothing but a bunch of scared guys in expensive suits, terrified that the American public is finally waking up to the ridiculous joke that has been their lives for the last 10 years. Jimmy Kimmel just stood there, the stage light feeling less like a crown and way more like a target, as the leading lady of the MAGA movement walked away, leaving the jester to rot in the silence he created himself. Jimmy, do you really feel a surge of pride standing next to a woman who broadcasts her empty life to the world like it's some kind of trophy? Have we really reached a point in history where a woman's biggest achievement is her ability to wake up at noon and celebrate a life without any real meaning? The theater fell into a vacuum of silence so deep it felt like all the breathable air had been sucked out of the room. Jimmy Kimmel shifted his weight around, his expensive leather shoes squeaking against the polished floor like a trapped animal. That's a choice, Trump. And in this country, we value the freedom to pick your own path. Not every woman wants to be chained to a kitchen or a nursery, and they definitely refuse to be boxed in by old-school rules that belong in a museum. He tried to stand up straighter, trying to look like a modern knight defending the honor of the Hollywood elites. Chelsea Handler is showing women they can be successful, independent, and totally happy without fulfilling some outdated biological rule. Melania's eyes narrowed, a tiny movement that conveyed way more disgust than a long speech ever could. So, you find it heroic to wake up at 600 a.m. just to realize you have no kids to take care of, so you eat a special gummy and put yourself back to sleep? You find it inspiring that she wakes up again at 1,230 p.m. to put on ridiculous shoes because she doesn't have anyone to chase around the grocery store? Is this really the peak of the American woman's journey? A busy afternoon of doing whatever she feels like while the world around her falls apart? Kimmel's face twitched. The mention of those specific details from the day in the life video hitting him like a physical punch to the gut. It's comedy, Melania. It's satire. She's making fun of the expectations society forces on women. She's being honest about her actual life. And millions of women find that super refreshing. They're sick of being told their only worth is in having kids. That isn't honesty. Jimmy, that's the loud, desperate scream of a woman trying to convince herself she isn't fading into nothing. She tells women, it's totally amazing to be childless, to just have dogs and smoke up while skiing without clothes down a mountain. She produces this sad content because she doesn't have anything else to offer the future. You call it a choice, but all I see is deep, terrifying hopelessness. You're pushing a whole generation of women to drift into a future where they'll die alone, with nobody to remember their names and nobody to pass their love on to. They'll never know the love of a baby, and they'll never do anything besides act like oversized kids forever. The women sitting in the front rows, the high-powered bosses, and the spoiled stars, sat there like they had turned to stone. Melania's words didn't just attack a mindset, they hit the cold, hard edge of a fear that most of them buried deep under career goals and luxury purchases. It was the fear of a quiet house, the fear of an empty chair at the end of a long, successful life. And what about you, Jimmy? Do you think a man's purpose in life is to cheer for the breakdown of the family? Do you believe it's progressive to make fun of a woman's biology by calling her sterile or making jokes that her body is broken? Kimmel blinked rapidly. Hey, those are just jokes from the roast. I didn't write those lines. But you gave them the stage, and you laughed the loudest, didn't you? You preach about respecting women, yet you celebrate a culture that treats a woman's ability to have kids like a punchline and calls her loneliness liberation. Chelsea actually had to freeze her eggs. Jimmy, not because she wanted to, but because she was stuck in a cold, lonely reality that you helped build. She's the poster child for everything wrong with your modern feminist agenda. Kimmel tried to find his voice, but it felt stuck in his throat. Buried under the weight of his own crowd's massive hypocrisy. We're just trying to be inclusive. We're trying to show there isn't just one right way to live. There's a way that builds up a civilization, and a way that destroys it. Jimmy, the point of life is to give other people a great childhood, to give our kids the early years we had, not to just act like teenagers ourselves forever. By pushing this story, you aren't freeing women, you're trapping them in an empty version of life. You're selling them ridiculous shoes to walk down a road that goes nowhere. And when the stage lights turn off and the clapping stops, what's going to be left of your progressive dream world? A bunch of broken dreams and forgotten speeches, guarded by dogs and empty mansions. Kimmel looked out at the crowd, expecting to see a sea of nodding heads, but instead, he saw eyes full of sudden, sharp doubt. The silence wasn't just in the room. It was in the souls of the people who realized they were getting absolutely roasted by reality. This isn't about politics, Jimmy, it's about the survival of the human spirit against a system that wants to turn us all into disposable shoppers. You and your buddies at the top think you can rewrite the rules of nature with a clever script and a shocking headline. But the truth doesn't need to go viral to be real. It's felt in the heart of every mom who buckles her baby into a car seat, and it's felt in the emptiness of those who got tricked into thinking kids are just a burden. Melania took a step back, her silhouette a sharp, unbreakable line against the whole Hollywood machine. You call her a hero because she says she'd be brave enough to take out a historical dictator, but she doesn't even have the guts to look in the mirror without taking a substance. That's the reality of your modern world, Jimmy. And thankfully, it's finally coming to an end. Kimmel opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out, just the sound of a guy realizing he was the punchline the whole time. The former First Lady didn't wait for his surrender, she had already dropped the hammer. The silence inside the Netflix theater had shifted from a shocked gasp to something way heavier. It was the kind of quiet that happens right before a landslide. Jimmy Kimmel stood frozen, his eyes darting toward the teleprompter like some miracle might pop up on the screen to save him. But the screen stayed completely blank, reflecting only the panicked blinking of a guy who realized his progressive armor was made of cheap paper. Melania Trump stepped forward, her heels clicking on the stage with the perfect timing of a ticking clock. She wasn't just a guest at this comedy special anymore. She was running a total demolition. Was it during that night, Jimmy, drinking expensive champagne, that you laughed at those young girls? Her voice was smooth as silk, but as freezing as a winter storm. Did you laugh at them the same way you're laughing at me right now? With that same smug, untouchable attitude? The cameras zoomed right in on Kimmel's face, catching the exact moment his eyes went wide with pure, absolute terror. But Trump, you're diving way too deep into conspiracy theories now, Kimmel stammered, sounding weak and shaky. There's no proof of whatever it is you're hinting at. This is a comedy show, not some dark true crime documentary. He tried to force a laugh, but it died in his throat, sounding more like a choked sob. Proof, Jimmy? Melania tilted her head a little, her stare cutting right through the makeup and ego that made up his TV persona. The proof is in your shaking hands right now. It's in the way your heartbeat is practically jumping out of your neck, thumping against a collar that suddenly feels way too tight. Documents don't just disappear because the media refuses to talk about them. They don't vanish just because a few late-night hosts decide to make jokes about something else to distract people. They just wait. They wait for the right person to find the code to the vault. They wait for the perfect moment to be dragged into the light. The narrator's voice cut through the tension, a deep, patriotic tone that echoed with the heavy weight of reality. This was the elite insider party that Hollywood had spent 16 years trying to scrub from the internet. Back in 2010, while everyday Americans were struggling to bounce back from a housing crash, the elites were partying in a mansion fueled by dirty money and dark secrets. It wasn't a massive event, it was a private hangout for the untouchable 7 people. According to the whispers that had finally turned into shouts, Prince Andrew was there, dragging his legacy through the mud. Woody Allen was there, a guy whose personal life had always been a dark stain on the industry. And Chelsea Handler, the woman Jimmy just called a modern-day hero, had a seat right at that exact table. You call them heroes, Jimmy, but they sat at the table of a monster. Melania kept going, her words hitting like heavy artillery. They drank wine, while the lives of minors were traded around like products. And when the news finally broke, when reality started to crack your fancy little bubble, what did you do? You didn't demand accountability. You didn't ask for an investigation. You didn't use your platform to protect the victims. No, you did what you do best. You covered it up. You used your monologues to distract everyone with cheap political jokes. You used your writers to bury your friends' names under a mountain of partisan talking points. Kimmel was pale as a ghost now, his mouth hanging open as he struggled to breathe. That was 16 years ago. People go to dinners. It doesn't mean anything. It means everything when the guy hosting the dinner is known for the absolute worst, darkest crimes imaginable. Melania shot back. It means everything when those exact same guests spend the next 10 years lecturing America about morals. It means everything when you use women's empowerment as a shield to hide the fact that you hung out with people who destroy innocence. The silence in the room turned into a total vacuum, an empty space where the progressive narrative just stopped working. The female executives in the front row, women who built their entire careers on empowerment hashtags, couldn't even look at the stage. They were literally watching the ghosts of 2010 rise up from the floorboards. They were seeing the massive double standards of an entire industry exposed by a woman who refused to follow their script. You think the files were destroyed when the prison cameras went dark? Don't you, Jimmy? Melania reached into her designer bag, her fingers touching something that caught the stage lights. You think the flight logs were the only things he kept? He was a guy who lived on blackmail. He collected dark secrets the way you collect TV awards. And he wasn't the only one who had copies. Jimmy Kimmel stared at Melania's hand, breathing fast and totally panicking. The narrator's voice came back, sharp and cynical. This was the ultimate threat, hanging by a thread over the head of every elite puppet in Hollywood. The establishment had spent millions keeping that 2010 list away from the public. They ruined careers, messed with search algorithms, and threatened whistleblowers to keep that party a secret. But Melania Trump wasn't a whistleblower. She was the former First Lady, and she had the master key to the vault. I'm not a comedian, Jimmy. I don't need to make people laugh to matter. I just need to be right. And as you stand there, wondering if your name is on those documents, you realize something really important. This crazy roast isn't happening to me, it's happening to all of you. The truth is coming, Jimmy. And it doesn't care about your TV ratings. It doesn't care about your progressive talking points. It only cares about being exposed. Kimmel's knees literally gave out a little, and he had to grab the podium to keep from falling. He looked like a broken man in a ruined suit, a clown who pushed a joke way too far with the wrong person. The truth roast had turned into a massive confession booth, and Melania Trump was the only person in the room holding the cards to offer forgiveness or total ruin. Standing there looking perfectly elegant and totally ruthless, the ghosts of 2010 seemed to fill the room, watching the guy who tried to hide them finally meet his match. The list wasn't just a rumor, it wasn't a crazy theory. It was a career death sentence for the Hollywood elites, and Melania was just getting warmed up. Should we talk about who else is on the list, Jimmy? Or should we wait for the next commercial break? Kimmel stayed totally silent. He couldn't speak. His world had just collapsed, and the only sound left was a country finally waking up from the nightmare. This is Phase 4 of the Great Comeback. This is how we win: by refusing to let the dark secrets stay hidden, by dragging that 2010 dinner table out for the whole world to see, and making sure the guys who laughed back then never laugh again. Jimmy Kimmel leaned forward, trying to look tough, thinking he finally found the magic bullet to save his empire. He cleared his throat, putting on that serious, rehearsed news anchor voice. But Trump, let's talk about the real darkness hiding behind these laughs. The kind your side tries to cover up with slogans and flags. Right here tonight, the people you call your biggest fans turned a massive national tragedy into a punchline. They laughed at a man who couldn't breathe, turning a horrifying event into cheap comedy for a cheering crowd. They joked that he was looking up from below, laughing so hard he couldn't breathe. Is that the greatness your side wants for America? Total cruelty toward the vulnerable and going back to the worst days of racist jokes? Kimmel looked out at the crowd, begging for that usual wave of progressive outrage, waiting for the front rows to gasp in anger. He wanted to spark an instant cancellation, to turn Melania into the face of a hateful mindset, and pin the most offensive jokes of the night directly on her. But Melania Trump stayed as still as a statue, cutting right through his fake moral act like a laser. Jimmy, do you really have the guts to bring up that tragedy in a room full of people who turned it into a massive money-making business? Her voice was calm, but it cut like a surgeon, exposing a deep infection. You and your Hollywood friends used that tragedy for edgy comedy, making these filthy roast specials for global streaming, and then you have the nerve to call yourselves champions of justice. Kimmel's smile twitched, gripping the mic stand tight as he realized she wasn't falling into his trap. Wait, comedy is about relieving social tension. It's how we deal with deep wounds. He waved his hands around, trying desperately to piece his falling narrative back together. We bring dark topics into the light so we can laugh and heal. That's the whole point of a roast, and your side clearly doesn't get it. Melania gave a slight, disgusted sneer that vanished instantly, leaving behind a terrifying, intense focus. No, Jimmy, that isn't healing, and it definitely isn't art. It's how you guys cash in on wounds you refuse to let heal. You laugh when people can't breathe, and you only cry when your sponsors threaten to leave. Tell me, who signed the check for the comedian who made that joke? Who edited the clip, fixed the audio, and pushed it to the top of the algorithms to get more subscribers? It was your Hollywood buddies, the exact same ones who post dark squares online and lecture us about extremism while cashing checks from highly offensive jokes. Kimmel stammered, sweat shining through his expensive makeup. It's free speech. We let creators explore awkward stuff, even if it offends people. Is it free speech? Or is it structured cruelty, disguised as a benefit to society? She took a slow, menacing step toward him. The narrator's voice cut in again. Hollywood's fake humanitarian mask was slipping off, exposing an industry that exploits pain just for views. You talk about bias, but your industry turned division into its biggest cash cow. You need these fights, Jimmy. You push toxic scripts with extremist jokes just to keep your ratings up. You think it's great to see these jokes because they give your dying industry the shock value it desperately needs. You call it relieving tension, I call it a completely bankrupt culture. You make offensive jokes about history and controversial actors, and then you wonder why the country is split. You greenlight scripts with horrible racial stereotypes. Your words, your show, your profit. Kimmel blinked rapidly, looking off stage for a commercial break that wasn't happening. The progressive crowd, the exact same people who police everyone's words online, sat completely paralyzed. They realized the very jokes they were cheering for were the ultimate proof of their own massive double standards. They were the ones paying the subscriptions, they were the ones providing the laughs for the most toxic content on the internet. Jimmy, you don't care about the man who couldn't breathe. You only care about the viewer numbers. You don't protect justice. You protect your right to stand on a stage and judge the regular people who actually have to live in the broken world you created. You talk about unity, but you use minorities as props to look progressive. You look at a pop star like Lizzo and allow horrible jokes about her body just to get a cheap laugh. You use her as a target while pretending to be her ally. That's the price of building your career on exploitation. You completely lose your right to lecture anyone about what's right. Kimmel stood there shaking, fumbling with the mic cord like it was a noose. He finally saw himself the way she did, a total opportunist clinging to other people's tragedies to stay relevant. The narrator's voice came back, sharp and serious, explaining how Hollywood's fake activism is actually made. It's made by taking the most painful parts of reality, slapping them into a comedy special, and selling them back to a divided audience. It's made by throwing around political buzzwords and joking about tragedies while pretending to be the good guys. Don't you ever mention justice to me again, Jimmy. Not while you're eating at the table of an industry that feeds on pain. This might be called a roast, but the only thing getting burned tonight is Hollywood's fake moral superiority. Melania turned her back on him, standing tall against the chaos on stage. She left him alone in the spotlight, a clown, with no one laughing, a symbol of the elite media finally getting exposed. The truth roast revealed something Kimmel wasn't ready for. Everyday people see right through the fake humanitarian act. They see the manipulation. They see the cruelty. And they are done being the punchline. As she walked into the shadows, the silence was the loudest thing Kimmel ever heard. It was the sound of the system collapsing, and the elite swamp finally getting drained by the truth. Jimmy Kimmel's eyes were bloodshot, gripping his desk so hard it almost cracked under his sheer panic. The king of late night was totally exposed, and Melania was holding up a mirror to his soul. But the country, Melania, he suddenly yelled, his voice cracking like a broken record. Your husband is a threat to our foundations. Has going to burn down the systems that protect people like me, people like us. Has a threat to the sacred norms that hold this nation together. Melania didn't flinch, standing perfectly composed against the flashing lights. The country you're talking about, Jimmy? Or the extortion racket you built for your Hollywood buddies? Because the norms that let a monster feast with your inner circle while the press looked away aren't foundations, they're prison bars. The norms that let modern comedians mock every parent while bragging about doing substances at noon aren't sacred, they're a sickness. Kimmel looked purely terrified, the sweat washing away his progressive mask. That's just talk. We are the culture. We set the trends and tell the world what matters. And what exactly have you influenced, Jimmy? What's your legacy? You've convinced a generation of women that being childless and having dogs is a win, while you secretly mock them in your writers' rooms. You've convinced young men that mocking tragedy is saving comedy. Our real victory doesn't live in fake applause that you buy with Netflix's crashing stock. It lives in homes where kids' laughter is louder than your teleprompter. It lives in men brave enough to be dads and women brave enough to be moms, despite your industry making them feel completely worthless. I look at my son, and I see a future your elite handlers can't even begin to understand. I see a legacy built on faith, family, and the courage to stand for the truth when society demands you lie. What do you see when you look at your friends, Jimmy? Do you see a future, or just another cheap, offensive joke? Kimmel was hyperventilating, his tie hanging loose like a noose. You think you can beat this whole media machine? You think you can take down a system that's controlled the public for 60 years? We have the algorithms. We have the Hollywood magic. We have the power to make anyone disappear." Melania leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper like a final verdict in a quiet courtroom. "The machine is burning itself down from the inside, Jimmy, and you're too busy fighting the truth to notice your own throne turning to ash. You only defend controversial comedians when you're terrified your stock will crash even further. You're rotting away like forgotten leftovers in a fridge, cold, abandoned, and destined for the trash. Look at yourself. Really look into that camera you love so much. You look completely withered, artificial, and totally empty inside." Kimmel's legs gave out. The guy who spent a decade mocking Middle America suddenly looked incredibly small. He reached for his chair, fumbling like a blind man in the dark, gasping for support that wasn't there. He collapsed into his seat, completely shattered by his own double standards. He sat there, a puppet with cut strings, an exposed fraud. The elites weren't coming to save him. The swamp was draining, and Kimmel was left gasping on the floor, his viral dreams turning into total irrelevance. You talk about saving comedy, Jimmy, but you couldn't even save yourself. You thought it was amazing to watch people get roasted, but you never thought the fire would reach your own house. You made horrible extremist jokes, but the only thing burning here is your credibility. Melania loomed over him, casting a massive shadow over the stage. She didn't look angry. She just looked at him with the cold pity of a queen, watching a traitor fall into his own trap. "This isn't a rehearsal, Jimmy. This isn't just a news story about some official getting fired. This is the end of your era and the start of a legacy you can never cancel. You tried to push massive political narratives, but the world is seeing what happens when a guy sells his soul for a laugh no one believes in anymore. You look like a guy desperately trying to buy back his own dignity. But Jimmy, nobody is selling." The audience was completely paralyzed. The early laughs were replaced by heavy, judgmental silence. The tech crew stopped working and just stared. They weren't looking at the teleprompter, they were looking at reality. Our victory is that we don't need your shocking headlines or viral marketing to know who we are. We are the people who value family and kids over partying and ski trips. We are the people who know life isn't about acting like a teenager forever, but building a world for the next generation. You called us broken, but look at who's truly empty tonight. Jimmy, your house is empty, your words are empty, and your time is up. He was just a ghost in his own theater, an activist without a cause, a relic of a modern ideology that finally ate itself alive. Enjoy the silence, Jimmy. It's the only real thing you have left. Melania turned her back on him, walking away as confidently as she entered the White House. She left him there, a withered shell under the harsh light of truth, while the rest of the country finally started breathing again. This is phase 6 of the great comeback. This is how we win, by letting the garbage burn itself out and leaving the real legacy standing in the ashes. And as the theater lights finally flickered out, the only sound left was the clock finally running out on the entertainment industry. The venue felt like a tomb. The bright lights that protected the Hollywood elite were dying out, like the building itself was tired of pretending. Just one single spotlight followed Melania as she stood over the wreckage of Kimmel's career. The audience, people who spent their lives being told what to think by teleprompters, started whispering in the dark. It sounded like a hive losing its queen. Nobody was laughing at Jimmy's jokes anymore. Nobody was waiting for the fake applause to tell them it was safe to smile. The swamp is emptying, Jimmy. Even your protectors are sneaking out. You're just the last pawn on the board, and the game is over. Kimmel looked up, his face a mix of pure exhaustion and panic. You think one bad night ends the world? We are Netflix. We have billions. We have the shows that save comedy. We have the big celebrity roasts, stuff that's insane and offensive just because we allow it. Melania tilted her head, her stare as cold as ice. You talk about saving comedy while your own stock is begging to crash. You want to be exposed, Jimmy, because you know the elite parties are over. You want the world to think you're still relevant, but even your glorious leaders are getting tossed out like yesterday's script. Didn't you hear the news? Or were you too busy practicing highly offensive jokes to notice your favorite producer, Barack Obama? He got fired, Jimmy. They literally just dismissed him, and they didn't even give him a goodbye speech. Kimmel's eyes went wide, dropping his useless cue cards. That's just a rumor. As a legend, has the foundation of our creative direction, has the foundation of a house that already burned down. Netflix only protected Dave Chappelle because they were panicking, not because of morals. They realized the ultra-liberals they catered to were actually killing their business. This is how we win, Jimmy, not with the weapons you write into your movies, but with the cold, hard, 99.1% success rate of the truth. We win by letting you talk until everyone sees the insane reality of who you really are. The narrator's voice cut through, sounding like a broadcast from the heart of the conservative movement. The deep state script was finally on its last page. They thought they could hijack the American soul, turning us into a demographic controlled by clickbait and viral marketing. They thought they could feed us cheap insults, and we'd be too distracted to notice they were robbing us blind. But they forgot one thing: the American people aren't a script. And Melania Trump wasn't a character they could stuff into a file. You're like an annoying fire alarm, Jimmy Loud. Persistent, but ultimately ignored. You tell people that controversial guests are what happens without health care. But look at what happens when a country loses the truth. It gets a guy who mocks everything, while his own life falls apart under his lies. Kimmel tried to stand, but his legs were jelly. We still have control. We have the media. We have the connections. You have the rubble, Jimmy. If people could see how you turned out, they'd be disgusted. You talk about helping people grow, but you're keeping everyone in the gutter. You're rotting like old leftovers, cold and heading for the trash. The crowd's whispering turned into a solid hum of agreement. The very people who spent years agreeing with Jimmy were now looking at each other with serious doubt. They finally saw the offensive slurs and tasteless jokes for what they were, the desperate thrashing of a dying machine. They saw the political scripts for what they were, fake drama, designed to keep them asleep. You said, "It was a net positive to have these edgy jokes, Jimmy." Well, here is a real joke. The fact that you think you're still a king when the throne has already been sold for scrap. Your protectors are begging for pardons that will never come. And you're stuck here under a dying spotlight. Enjoy the silence, Jimmy. It's the only truth you have left. Kimmel slumped back, covering his face as the last of his Hollywood glow faded into a sickly pale. The truth roast was completely over. And as Melania walked off, her silhouette a sharp line against the dark, the whole nation started to breathe again. This is how we win, by letting the swamp drain itself until nothing is left but the truth. And the truth was, the joke was finally, mercifully, on them. The heavy velvet curtains started to close with a loud creak, sounding like a blade dragging across stone. Jimmy Kimmel stood completely alone in the middle of the stage, the bright spotlight fading into a sickly yellow glow that felt like it was suffocating him. All around him was the wreckage of $1 billion narrative, crushed cue cards, shattered offensive jokes, and the ruined pieces of a late-night legacy. The audience wasn't a crowd anymore, they were just ghosts, slipping out the exits without saying a single word to their defeated clown. Melania pivoted away, her silhouette looking like a freezing, unbending Arctic mountain against the dark. She paused at the edge of the stage, resting her hand lightly on the curtain like she was feeling the heartbeat of the building collapsing. She didn't look back at the guy who spent a decade trying to make her a punchline. She didn't need to. "Sleep well, Jimmy," her voice echoed through the silent ceiling, a calm, lethal warning that made the tech crew shiver. "And make sure your front door is locked tight tonight, because the truth doesn't just politely tap, Jimmy. It completely shatters the door." Her final words felt like a massive physical weight that totally crushed Kimmel's arrogant Hollywood disguise. She stepped into the shadows, disappearing with the effortless grace of a leader finishing a necessary, dirty job. Kimmel stayed there, eventually dropping to his knees, totally empty, in the middle of a modern world that finally ran out of lies. The clown was totally silent, and for the first time in 16 years, the theater was completely honest. The narrator's voice came back, a deep, echoing tone, carrying the passion of thousands of patriots and the sharp edge of a guy who saw the establishment for exactly what it was. This was the end of the truth roast, but it was the start of a reckoning that no social media algorithm could stop. Hollywood thought they could roast the truth, but you can't set fire to the sun. You just end up getting burned. They thought they could use tragedies and the pain of a nation to sell subscriptions, but the 99.1% success rate of reality finally caught up to them. They told young women it was amazing to be childless, to just own dogs and party hard while skiing down a mountain. They made sad content showing a day in the life of a child-free woman, trying to convince people that waking up at noon and getting high is the ultimate goal in life. But Melania Trump just reminded the world that the whole point of life isn't to act like a teenager forever. The point of life is to give other people a childhood, to build homes where a child's love is the foundation, not a burden to avoid. The elite swamp is collapsing, and the people who thought they were running the show are getting fired from their own scripts. Netflix protected controversial comedians, not because they loved them, but because they realized their progressive stars were failing so badly they were dragging the whole company down. That 2010 list is still out there, Jimmy, and every time you close your eyes, you see the names of disgraced royals and controversial directors staring back at you. You see the dinner table at that infamous mansion, and you realize the roast was never actually about Tom Brady or Kevin Hart. It was always about the political scripts you've been feeding us for 25 years, hoping we wouldn't notice the horrible things happening behind closed doors. But we noticed. The conservative movement noticed. The people who care more about raising a family than the empty speeches of a dying industry noticed. And as Melania Trump heads back to Mar-a-Lago, she leaves a warning that should be ringing in the ears of every elite in Washington and LA. The Great Awakening isn't just a podcast format. It's a massive cultural shift taking back the soul of America. It's the return of traditional values, the ones that know a parent's love is way stronger than some shocking viral clickbait. It's knowing that our real victory is in our homes, our kids, and our total refusal to be beaten down by a system that hates us. This is how we win. We win by standing in the light while they shake in the dark with their massive secrets. We win by being the king who doesn't need to hide behind activists on a stage. The truth is breaking the door down. And for the people who stayed loyal to their flag and their family, it's the absolute best sound in the world. The era of the clown is over. The era of the Ice Queen and the King is here to stay. Sleep well, Hollywood. Check your locks, because the 99.1% is coming for you. And we don't need a teleprompter to tell us what's real. This is the end of the script, but the beginning of a real country. Stay strong, stay faithful, and never forget, this is our house.